Hey, welcome to SpaceX Daily, episode 26. It's July 8th, 2026, and I'm Patrick in Vancouver. From the launch pad to the trading floor, here's everything that moved today. Starship lunar rideshare contracts move orbital refueling and heavy payload delivery timelines forward by demonstrating early commercial demand. iSpace has booked a Starship slot to offer lunar rideshare cargo services at lower cost than dedicated landers. The agreement targets multiple missions that leverage Starship's payload capacity for secondary payloads alongside primary cargo. Remember, the show covered Starship's flight test arc on yesterday's episode. This development fits by adding commercial lunar demand that could accelerate orbital refueling demonstrations planned for the 2026 to 2027 window. The first manifested iSpace payload integration timeline is now the near-term item to track. An FAA advisory sets a not earlier than date of July 14 for Starship's next integrated flight test. The window aligns with ongoing booster and ship processing at Starbase. This test remains the next data point in the campaign aimed at demonstrating booster catch and rapid reuse. Any slip would ripple directly into the refueling timeline the iSpace agreement now depends on. SpaceX filed an application to operate up to 100,000 next-generation Starlink satellites optimized for higher-capacity AI-era traffic. The Gen 3 design targets expanded laser link networking and direct-to-cell backhaul. Recall that Starlink expansion was discussed yesterday. This request continues the constellation growth arc and directly tests subscriber and data demand scaling. Regulators' response timeline will determine when additional orbital shells can be populated. SpaceX continues to secure additional national security launch and satellite contracts across multiple agencies. The awards build on existing Starshield and launch cadence work without altering current manifest priorities. These contracts directly support Falcon and future Starship national security missions. Watch for the next round of Space Force task orders that could affect booster assignment. Falcon 9 successfully deployed the Transporter 17 mission on July 7th, carrying multiple small satellites. The flight continues the dedicated rideshare cadence that has become a core part of Falcon operations. Industry voices cited in the report expressed uncertainty over long-term availability of similar slots. Observers will track whether future transporter missions maintain the same manifest density. Apelink confirmed contact with its initial satellite launched on the July 7th rideshare mission. The spacecraft will demonstrate data relay capability under an experimental FCC license. The successful checkout keeps the rideshare program's secondary payload model intact. Next milestone is the planned relay demonstration pass. Apelink's first satellite checkout occurred after the July 7th launch. The experimental license covers the initial data relay tests. Observers note the checkout supports continued secondary payload flights on Falcon. Reddit users are tracking a recent NSF Space Coast flyover showing expanded Florida ground support infrastructure and multiple Starship-related road closures. Observers note visible progress on new tank farms and transport routes near existing pads. A separate thread discusses whether controlled satellite deorbits inside Starship could serve as a proving ground for closed-loop material recycling, noting that recovering hardware intact would reduce both orbital debris and raw material demand for future builds. A separate post examines how Starship's larger diameter might affect ground transport logistics once the vehicle moves beyond current test articles. The diameter change raises questions about route clearances and support equipment sizing. Participants note that wider sections could require new overland transport fixtures. The thread ties these logistics questions to future Starbase to Florida movement plans. Worth keeping an eye on, industry executives quoted in coverage of the Transporter 17 launch described growing concern that the dedicated rideshare cadence may not remain available at current frequency. The worry centers on manifest pressure from Starlink and national security missions that could crowd out third-party small satellites. Resolution would require either additional Falcon vehicles or a clear Starship rideshare pathway that preserves slot access. The May 28th Blue Origin incident at Cape Canaveral's Launch Complex 36 has prompted federal review of launch site capacity. Options under discussion include new pad construction, shared use agreements, and regulatory streamlining. The review directly affects future Falcon and Starship manifest flexibility at Florida ranges. Any policy change would influence pad turnaround times and annual launch ceilings. Federal officials are evaluating infrastructure upgrades at existing Florida facilities. The review process includes input from multiple launch providers operating at Cape Canaveral. A German firm has secured a decade-long lease on a Nova Scotia launch pad for sounding rocket and small launcher operations. The agreement adds a new North American site outside traditional U.S. ranges. It does not directly affect SpaceX Florida or Texas pads, but illustrates growing demand for dedicated launch infrastructure. Watch for any follow-on commercial agreements at the same facility. The 10-year lease covers both sounding rockets and small orbital vehicles. Nova Scotia officials highlighted the site as an expansion of regional space activity. On the AI front, SpaceX's FCC filing for 100,000 Gen 3 satellites explicitly frames the constellation as an AI-era global backbone, citing higher laser link throughput and direct-to-cell capacity needed for large-scale model inference traffic. The application does not detail on-orbit processing hardware but ties orbital expansion directly to anticipated data center and edge compute demand. From an engineering standpoint, Starship's ride-share architecture for lunar cargo rests on a simple mass fraction advantage. Once the vehicle reaches low Earth orbit, its remaining propellant budget can deliver several times the payload mass of a dedicated lander, because the same booster and tanker fleet already exist for other missions. The key design choice is treating the Starship upper stage as a reusable transfer vehicle rather than a single-use lander, which collapses the per-kilogram cost floor to the marginal expense of extra propellant and one additional tanker flight. That approach only works if orbital refueling can be performed reliably within the same flight test cadence already planned for 2026 to 2027. If the first successful refueling demonstration slips, the lunar rideshare value proposition shrinks back toward the higher fixed cost of building dedicated landers. The next measurable milestone is therefore not the eSpace contract itself, but the first on-orbit propellant transfer test that validates the underlying mass budget. And a quick market note, SPCX is at $149.47, down 1%. Before we go, the July 14 flight test window will show whether refueling hardware stays on schedule for the lunar missions now pulling demand. And that's a wrap on today's SpaceX developments. SPCX is trading at $149.47, down 1%. Share this with a fellow spaceflight fan if you found it useful, and subscribe so you don't miss tomorrow's episode. I'm Patrick in Vancouver. See you next time. And before you go, this show is part of the NARA Network, a family of daily podcasts on tech, science, and markets, each one a short, sharp briefing you can finish on the commute. If today earned its place in your feed, here's your next listen. Models and Agents, your daily briefing on AI models and agents. Find every show free at naranetwork.com. This episode used AI voice synthesis of my voice. Editorial selection and analysis are my own.